So, what is going on? These contracts, the new credit given at the market, also have some specific characteristics. And this picture is like a summary of what is happening inside the contract. Okay, you're having more contracts, perfect. You're having more people reach, perfect, or more firms reach. What are the characteristics of the contracts, or the typical contract you observe at the market? Well, the typical contract, or the median contract, is going down in the size of the contract, and the interest rate associated with this contract is typically going up. So for this market, what we observe in the data is that the typical contract's loan size is going down, and the associated interest rate is going up. So, yes?
That's what you should expect if you're just loaning to worse borrowers.
We were going to see that in a moment. Where this interest is coming from, okay? That's one of the questions I want to ask, or to answer, sorry. So, to sum up, what are the mechanisms and incentives that define how bank-client relationships are collectively determined altogether? What are the implications of the observed expansion in the intermediation we observed in the data under simultaneous competition and heterogeneity on both supply and demand? What concept of equilibrium prevails in this framework, and what theoretical and efficient properties has? And finally, what are the testable policy implications from the frame? So basically, this is like the motivation for moving forward the analysis. Well, what this research does is to analyze a basic matching game with transferable utility. So what I'm going to introduce is a framework that has been very useful for analyzing another assortative relationships, such as education markets, which Matthias is doing at work right now, labor markets, medical interns allocation, and marriage. So what the matching model does is to add theoretical content to a previous model, which is the Hedonic price model, that basically allows you to analyze how the characteristics of certain goods induce difference in the final price. So what I'm going to introduce is a framework that allows you to understand how the assortative relationship between banks and clients simultaneously determine and the characteristics simultaneously determine the hedonic interest rate you observe across the contracts. What basically a matching mechanism does is to consider two sets of agents, different in their pursuits and their objectives, and we have supply and demand basically. They are different between themselves, among themselves. They pursue some objectives, and because of the objectives and the interaction of all these agents, we are able to see and observe the structure such that some clients in this framework has no banks, people without credit. Some banks have clients optimally, and some banks have no clients at all. So that's what theoretically could happen. Later we will characterize this to not allow for one of the cases. And what the matching mechanism does is to first define the incentives of the agents, what they are doing. Second, the decision-making environment, given the information they have. Third, given these two interactions, how these guys assign them between themselves, and what is the exchange equilibrium from this optimal interaction. In our framework, we are going to have supply and demand for something we call credit, but usually it's just resources. And what we are going to trade is a certain level of resources or capital, and we are going to allow them to bargain over the interest rate they are paying. Now, we are going deep into the model, and we are going to define a financial intermediary, which is an agent with the capacity to collect resources and put them to an entrepreneur by giving them credit. Now, this collection of resources has a cost for them. So this cost function depends on the level of resources they need to collect and a parameter which makes them different. So this parameter is the technology each bank or intermediary has for itself. And we are going to assume that this technological parameter lives on a space, a bounded space, with some probability distribution. So the intermediaries are agents with the capacity to collect resources and put them into the market at a different cost. This cost function is going to be different only by the technology, and the assumption we are going to make is that better banks have lower marginal cost. That's the basic assumption. So the heterogeneity in the technology has to do with difference in the marginal cost for banks. What are the pursuits of the utility function from these guys? Well, given a contract which specifies a certain level of capital and an interest rate or repayment interest rate, these guys have two options. Either not going into the credit market, so they enjoy only their endowment, or they go to the credit market, pay the resources from collecting the capital, and then receive at the end of the period the repayment rate times the capital they lent. For an entrepreneur of talent data, which is given at this moment. So this guy has the option of giving the entrepreneur, giving credit or not. So he's always having the outside option of not giving credit at the market. Now, what are the entrepreneurs? Well, these guys are the lucky ones who have an idea. The idea has different scales. Some guys have a very good idea, some guys have a not very good idea. And the quality of the idea, which is data, is defined over a compact space. But bad news. They require resources for making the idea come true. So what we are going to assume is that the production function or the output they have access, the idea, is positively related to capital and their own talent. And just for keeping tractability for this basic model, we are going to assume that the capital they require is fixed for each talent value. So basically, the talent is indeed the scale of the project. We have small scale projects, large scale projects, and these guys have some requirements of capital at the market. Each requirement is increasing in the talent, so more talented people requires more capital. We are keeping fixed the requirements so they cannot trade and they cannot choose the scale of the project, but they have only all or nothing. Okay? Indeed, these assumptions may seem strange, but just by talking to people at the commercial banks, they say that usually the entrepreneurs, when they arrive to the branch, they have a requirement of capital. I need that much. And you can give it to me or not give it to me. So this is like the kind of elasticity we're trying to capture to this assumption, okay? And these guys, the entrepreneurs, given a contract that specifies a certain level of capital they have, and the repayment rate that we are going to let them bargain later, have two options. Given that they are with the bank Omega, they can accept or reject the contract. Basically, if they reject, they keep their income, no problem at all, they are surviving. But if they accept the contract, then, hey, they get the profits. The profit Q of theta minus the repayment rate. Now, we have a lot of agents, which we are going to assume they are continuous on two spaces: the space of entrepreneurs, the space of banks. Better banks have lower cost. Better entrepreneurs have larger scale projects. So from the interaction of all these agents together, what can we expect